out of first class now! This...
Remove him right now! Cooperate or face security. Put that in writing. I'm the CEO you need.
I told you to leave the cabin. Allison Reed said it loud enough for every first-class passenger to hear. Her voice cut through the soft hum of the aircraft like a blade. The boarding lights were still bright. Rain tapped against the oval windows at Chicago O'Hare. Somewhere near the front galley, a coffee cart rattled once, then stopped. Ethan Brooks sat in seat 3A, his hands resting on the armrests, his navy suit neat, his face calm. Too calm. "Mom," he said, looking up at her, "I have a first-class ticket." Allison's eyes narrowed. "No, you don't," she said. "You're in the wrong cabin." A few heads turned. A silver-haired man in row 2 lowered his newspaper. A woman with pearl earrings paused with her compact mirror half open. Across the aisle, a younger passenger slowly lifted his phone. Not all the way, just enough to record without being obvious. Ethan noticed. Allison noticed too. That only made her voice sharper. "Sir, this section is reserved for our real premium passengers." The word real hung in the air. Ethan did not blink. He had heard softer versions of that word before. In hotel lobbies, at private clubs, in boardrooms where men shook hands around him before learning he owned the company they were trying to impress. Real meant familiar. Real meant expected. Real meant not him. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out his boarding pass. "I'm happy to show you," he said. Allison put up one hand before he could extend it fully. "Put that away." The motion was small but cruel, like the paper itself had offended her. Behind Allison, Preston Caldwell adjusted the gold watch on his wrist. He was 59, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and dressed in the kind of charcoal suit that announced money before a man opened his mouth. Beside him, his wife, Margaret, stood with one gloved hand wrapped around a cream leather handbag. Margaret's smile was thin, not polite, not nervous, certain. "This is ridiculous," Preston muttered. "We always sit there." Allison turned toward him with a warmer face, a softer voice. "I understand, Mr. Caldwell. We'll take care of this." Ethan heard the difference. Everyone nearby heard it. The cabin became smaller. The leather seats, the brushed metal trim, the white overhead lights, the soft scent of rain and expensive cologne. It all pressed inward. Allison stepped closer to Ethan. "Sir, I need you to gather your things and move to another seat." Ethan looked at her name tag. Allison Reed, senior flight attendant. Then he looked back into her eyes. "That won't be necessary," he said. "This is my assigned seat." His voice was low, trolled, not weak, not angry. The kind of voice that made people listen because it refused to beg for space. Margaret let out a quiet laugh. "Maybe there was a mistake," she said. "These systems confuse people all the time." She did not say the rest. "People like you." But Ethan heard it anyway. He had spent 45 years hearing the words people swallowed. Sometimes silence was louder than insult. Sometimes a smile could carry a whole history of closed doors. Allison folded her arms. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell are long-standing premium members," she said. "They fly this route regularly. This seat is part of their usual accommodation." Ethan held the boarding pass between two fingers. Usual is not the same as assigned. A hush moved through the cabin. Preston's face reddened. "Do you know how much money we spend with this airline?" Ethan turned slightly toward him. "No," he said, "and you don't know anything about me." The sentence landed hard. Margaret's fingers tightened around her handbag strap until the leather creaked. Allison's mouth pressed into a straight line. For the first time, the polished confidence in her face cracked. Not much. Just enough. Ethan placed the boarding pass on the armrest. "I paid for this seat," he said. "I boarded properly. I showed respect. I have not raised my voice." Then he looked from Allison to the Caldwells, and finally toward the passengers watching in silence. "So tell me," he said, "what exactly makes me the problem?" No one answered. The engines hummed beneath the floor. Rain slid down the window beside him. And in seat 3A, the man they had decided did not belong remained perfectly still. What none of them knew was that Ethan Brooks was not just another passenger. He was the founder and chief executive officer of Meridian Logic Systems. And by morning, the airline humiliating him in first class would be begging for his signature. Preston Caldwell did not sit down. He stood in the aisle with the hard patience of a man who believed the world would eventually correct itself in his favor. One hand rested on the back of seat 3B. The other tapped against his watch, slow and sharp like a warning clock. "Allison," he said, not looking away from Ethan. "We have a tight connection in San Francisco." "I understand, Mr. Caldwell," Allison replied. She said it quickly, too quickly. She wanted him to hear loyalty in her voice. She wanted the cabin to hear authority in it. Ethan heard fear. Margaret Caldwell shifted beside her husband. Her cream blazer was spotless. Her pearl earrings caught the overhead light each time she turned her head. She looked at Ethan as if he were not a man, not a customer, not someone with a destination and a life, but an inconvenience sitting in the wrong shape. "Surely," Margaret said, "there is another seat for him." For him. The words were soft, but they carried. The older woman in row 2 looked up again. Her reading glasses slid low on her nose. She watched Margaret, then Ethan, then Allison. Her mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Ethan noticed that too. Silence had weight. Sometimes it protected. Sometimes it wounded. Allison took a breath and lowered her voice, though not enough to make the conversation private. "Sir, we are trying to avoid a delay. I'm sure you can appreciate that." Ethan looked at the boarding pass on the armrest. "I appreciate clear rules," he said. "I appreciate people being treated by the same rules." A man behind Preston cleared his throat. His roller bag leaned against his knee. He was trapped in the aisle, impatient, uncomfortable, trying not to be part of what he was watching. Preston turned slightly toward him. "You see?" Preston said. "Now everyone has to wait." The blame moved like smoke, not to the people asking for what was not theirs, to the man refusing to disappear. Allison seized the moment. "Mr. Brooks, refusing a reasonable crew request can create a problem." Ethan lifted his eyes to her. "A reasonable request would be asking me if I needed help finding my seat. A reasonable request would be asking Mr. Caldwell to sit in his assigned seat." Preston laughed once. It was not amusement. It was dismissal. "My assigned seat," he said. "Do you have any idea how long we've been flying Meridian Air?" Margaret touched his arm, not to calm him, but to sharpen him. "Preston, don't argue with him," she said. "That's what he wants." Ethan turned toward her. "What I want," he said, "is to sit quietly on the flight I paid for." For a brief second, something human flickered across Margaret's face. Not compassion, not regret. Recognition, maybe. The smallest awareness that he had not shouted, had not insulted, had not threatened. Then it vanished. Allison's tablet chimed in her hand. She glanced at it, frowned, and tapped the screen with her thumb. The passenger list was there. The truth was there. Seat 3A, Ethan Brooks. Confirmed first class. She saw it. She hated that she saw it. Because truth was no longer useful to her. "Sir," she said, "colder now, I need cooperation." Ethan leaned back slightly. The leather creaked beneath his shoulder. "You keep using that word," he said. "But cooperation cannot mean surrendering my seat because someone else is more comfortable when I am gone." The younger passenger in row 4 raised his phone higher. Now Allison saw the lens clearly. Her face changed. Not guilt. Calculation. "Are you recording?" she asked the passenger. He swallowed. He was maybe 25, nervous, with a backpack tucked under his legs and earbuds hanging around his neck. "I'm just documenting what's happening," he said. "This is a private cabin," Allison snapped. "No," Ethan said quietly. "It's a commercial aircraft." The correction landed with a clean edge. A few passengers looked down. One woman pressed her lips together. The man with the roller bag stopped shifting. Preston's jaw hardened. "This is absurd," he said. "We spend more with this airline in a month than he probably spends in a year." Ethan did not flinch. There it was. Not hidden now. Not dressed in courtesy. Not buried under policy. Allison looked away from Preston too late. Everyone had heard. Ethan felt the old ache rise in his chest. He thought of his father's hands, rough from years of warehouse work. He thought of the first plane ticket his father had ever bought him, folded into an envelope with one sentence written on the back. "Walk in knowing your worth." Ethan breathed in, slow, steady. Then he picked up his boarding pass and placed it back inside his jacket. "Allison," he said, using her name for the first time, "you can call your supervisor now." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? You should call your supervisor," Ethan said, "before this becomes bigger than a seat." The cabin went still again. Preston scoffed. Margaret looked away. Allison stood frozen in the aisle, her tablet tight against her chest. She still believed she was managing a difficult passenger. She had no idea she was standing in front of the man Meridian Air's executives were scheduled to meet the next morning. Allison did not move at first. She stared at Ethan as if the request itself had crossed a line. A passenger asking for a supervisor was not unusual. It happened every day. Delayed bags, missed upgrades, cold coffee, tight connections. But this was different, and she knew it. He was not pleading. He was documenting. That made her uneasy. "Fine," she said at last. "If you want to escalate this, we can escalate it." Ethan looked at her. "I asked for review," he said. "You chose escalation." The words were quiet, but they carried into every row nearby. Allison turned sharply and walked toward the forward galley. Her heels pressed hard into the carpet. Preston Caldwell watched her go with a satisfied lift of his chin, as if order had finally been restored. Margaret adjusted the cuff of her blazer and sat halfway on the edge of seat 3B, though it was not hers. Ethan looked at the handbag she placed on the seat. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said. She turned with a thin smile. "Yes? That seat belongs to the passenger assigned to it." Margaret blinked. "It's just my bag. Then it should be easy to move." A small sound passed through the cabin, not quite laughter. More like air escaping from people who had been holding it too long. Margaret's face flushed. Preston reached over, grabbed the handbag, and handed it to her with a sharp motion. "Happy now?" he muttered. Ethan did not raise his voice. "No," he said, "but accurate." The young man in row 4 almost smiled, then caught himself. His phone remained steady. His fingers trembled slightly, but he kept filming. He had not planned to become part of anyone's evidence that morning. He was flying home to Sacramento, after visiting his mother in Evanston. He had wanted a quiet connection, a window seat, and maybe a nap. Now his chest felt tight. He knew what he was seeing mattered. At the front of the cabin, Allison leaned toward a man in a dark vest with a Meridian Air pin on his lapel. Victor Hale listened with his arms crossed. He was 48, square-jawed, with close-cut brown hair and the stiff posture of someone who believed order was a moral virtue. Allison spoke fast. "He's refusing to cooperate. The Caldwells are displaced. We may have a disruption." Victor's eyes moved toward row 3 before he had heard Ethan speak. That was his first mistake. He saw a black man seated calmly in first class. He saw phones raised. He saw a wealthy white couple standing nearby, offended and waiting. In the rush of boarding, with the departure clock running, he did what too many people in authority do. He chose the easiest story. Victor walked down the aisle with Allison just behind him. "Mr. Brooks," he said, stopping beside Ethan's seat. "I'm Victor Hale, cabin services manager. I understand we're having an issue." Ethan looked up. "There is no issue with my ticket." Victor's smile was professional but thin. "That is not what I asked." The air changed. Even Preston went quiet. Victor leaned slightly forward. "My crew has asked for your cooperation so we can resolve a seating concern and depart on time. I need you to work with us." Ethan placed both hands on the armrests. His posture did not change, but the stillness around him deepened. "Your crew is asking me to give up a confirmed first-class seat," he said. "Not for safety, not for maintenance, not for a medical need, for another passenger's preference. Is that correct?" Victor blinked once. Allison shifted behind him. Preston looked away. Margaret pressed her lips together. The question was too clean, too precise. It gave them no soft place to hide. Victor cleared his throat. "We are offering a reasonable accommodation." "To whom?" Ethan asked. Silence. The answer stood in the aisle, wearing a charcoal suit and a gold watch. Victor's jaw tightened. "Sir, refusing a crew member's instruction can become a serious matter." There it was. The wordless threat. Not yet security, not yet removal, but close enough for everyone to understand the direction. Ethan's eyes did not move. "I am not refusing a safety instruction," he said. I am refusing to be moved from the seat I paid for because Mr. Caldwell prefers the window, Preston snapped. For God's sake, just move the man. The cabin went colder. The older woman in row 2 finally lowered her glasses all the way. He has not done anything wrong, she said. Her voice was soft. But it broke something. Victor turned toward her. Mom, please allow us to handle this. She looked him straight in the eye. I am watching you handle it. No one spoke. Allison's face tightened. Victor's ears reddened. The young man's phone caught every second. Ethan felt a slow sadness move through him. Not surprise. He had lived long enough to know that fairness often arrived late, if it arrived at all. But even late fairness mattered. A single voice could change the temperature of a room. He reached into his jacket and removed a slim black card holder. He did not open it. He simply placed it on the armrest. Before you decide this is a serious matter, Ethan said, choose your words carefully. Victor looked at the card holder. For the first time, doubt entered his face, and Allison, standing behind him, felt the first cold edge of fear. Victor Hale stared at the black card holder longer than he meant to. It was not flashy. No gold edge. No diamond logo. Just smooth leather, worn slightly at one corner, the kind of object carried by someone who did not need attention to have power. That bothered him more than a loud threat would have. Mr. Brooks, Victor said, forcing his voice back into place. I don't know what you are implying. I'm not implying anything, Ethan said. I'm asking you to be exact. Allison shifted her weight. She wanted Victor to move faster. She wanted the problem removed before more phones came out. But the problem had not moved. He sat there with his seatbelt low across his lap, his hands open, his breathing steady. He looked like a man waiting for facts to catch up with the room. Preston stepped closer. This is unbelievable, he said. We are being held hostage by someone trying to make a point. Ethan turned his head slowly. I'm not making a point, he said. I am refusing to be erased. The words entered the cabin and stayed there. The older woman in row 2 looked down at her hands. Her name was Helen Whitaker, and she had spent 34 years teaching high school history in Ohio. She had taught students about the small daily choices that made injustice possible. She had believed herself brave in memory. But in the present, with a real man being cornered a few feet away, she had waited too long to speak. Her throat tightened. Margaret Caldwell leaned toward Preston. This is exactly what happens now, she whispered, still loud enough to be heard. Everything becomes an accusation. Ethan heard her. Victor heard her. So did the young man recording. Ethan did not answer Margaret. Not yet. He looked at Victor. If you are ordering me to move, he said, then please state the reason. Victor's eyes narrowed. The reason is cabin management. That is not a reason. It is my authority. That is not a reason either. The exchange was quiet, but it hit like hammer blows. Short, clean, public. Allison's face reddened. Sir, you're being difficult. Ethan looked at her. My tone has not changed. My documents have not changed. My seat assignment has not changed. Then he paused. Only your story has. The young man in row 4 swallowed hard. He could feel the moment turning. His name was Luke Bennett, 26, a community college counselor from California. He worked with students who apologized before asking for help. Students who had learned early that they had to sound grateful for basic fairness. Watching Ethan sit there, calm and unbent, did something to him. It made courage feel teachable. Victor glanced at Luke's phone. Sir, stop recording. Luke stiffened. I'm not interfering. This is a crew matter. It's happening in front of passengers, Luke said, his voice shaking but clear. Allison stepped forward. You need to put that away. Helen again, stronger this time. Leave him alone. He is not the issue. Allison turned sharply. Mom, please stay out of this. Helen lifted her chin. I stayed out too long. That sentence softened something in Ethan's eyes. For half a breath, the pressure inside him shifted. Not down, deeper. He had not expected rescue. People like him learned not to expect it. But when it came, even late, it mattered. It reminded him that decency could still enter a room quietly and change its direction. Victor did not like losing the room. He straightened. Mr. Brooks, this is your final opportunity to cooperate voluntarily. If you refuse, I may have to involve airport security. There it was, plain now, a threat wrapped in procedure. Preston's face brightened with cruel relief. Margaret exhaled as if the world had finally become sensible again. Allison's shoulders dropped slightly, comforted by the familiar shape of authority. Ethan looked at each of them. Then he opened the black card holder. The small sound of leather folding back seemed louder than it should have been. Inside was a matte black business card. He did not hand it to Victor immediately. He placed it on the tray table, face up under the clean white cabin light. Ethan Brooks, founder and chief executive officer, Meridian Logic Systems. Beneath the name was an embossed silver mark, simple and unmistakable. Victor's eyes dropped to the card, his lips parted. Allison looked down. For 1 second, she did not breathe. Meridian Logic Systems had been in every internal briefing for the past month. Meridian Air was negotiating with them to rebuild its failing customer service platform, the very platform blamed for years of complaints, misrouted cases, and uneven passenger treatment. The chief executive officer was supposed to be in a conference room tomorrow morning, not in seat 3A, not being threatened with security. Ethan looked up at Victor. Now, he said, calm as a closing door. Would you still like to make this a security matter? Victor did not answer right away. His eyes stayed on the business card, fixed there as if the letters might rearrange into something less dangerous. Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Logic Systems. The name had lived in executive emails, decks, strategy calls, and one urgent briefing marked confidential. Now it sat on a tray table in row 3, beside a boarding pass they had tried to ignore. Allison's hand tightened around her tablet. She knew the logo. Of course she knew it. Everyone in premium service had been told Meridian Air was preparing for a technology partnership. New complaint systems, new customer service tools, new bias detection audits, training updates, data review. She had rolled her eyes when the memo arrived. Another corporate initiative, she had thought. Now the initiative had a face, and she had called that face a liar. Preston Caldwell frowned, annoyed by a shift he did not understand. What is that supposed to prove? He demanded. Ethan did not look at him. It proves nothing, he said. My boarding pass already did that. Helen Whitaker closed her eyes for one brief second. The sentence hit her harder than the card did. It was not power that should have made Ethan worthy of respect. It was not money, not a title, not a company. He had been worthy before they knew his name. That was the wound. That was the lesson. Victor swallowed. Mr. Brooks, he said, his voice lower now, I believe there may have been a misunderstanding. Ethan looked up slowly. No, he said. There was a decision. The cabin went silent again. Misunderstanding was soft. It floated away. Decision had weight. Decision had fingerprints. Allison stepped forward quickly, desperate to get ahead of the damage. Sir, if my tone made you feel uncomfortable, that was never my intention. Ethan's eyes moved to her. You did not make me feel uncomfortable, he said. You tried to make me removable. Allison's lips parted, but no answer came. Luke Bennett's phone caught the moment. His heart was pounding now, not because he wanted anyone ruined, but because he understood how rare it was to see a person name harm without losing control. He had spent years telling young students that dignity was not the same as silence. Now he was watching a man prove it. The gate agent appeared at the aircraft door. Her headset sat crooked over one ear. She was a black woman in her late 30s with tired eyes and a sharp, observant face. Her name tag read Denise Carter. Victor, she said from the doorway. Operations is asking why the departure hold is still open. Victor turned toward her too quickly. We're handling a seating issue. Denise's gaze moved across the cabin. Preston standing, Margaret stiff in 3C but leaning into the aisle, Allison pale. Ethan seated in 3A, calm with a business card on the tray table. Phones recording. Her eyes sharpened. What kind of seating issue? Before Victor could answer, Ethan spoke. A paid passenger in an assigned first-class seat was asked to move because another passenger preferred the seat. Denise looked at him, then at the card. Her face changed. Not dramatically. Enough. Your name, sir? Ethan Brooks. The headset crackled against Denise's ear. She touched it with 2 fingers. One moment, she said. She turned slightly toward the jet bridge, but her voice still carried. Operations. Can you confirm executive travel notes for passenger Ethan Brooks on Meridian Flight 826? Allison flinched at the word executive. Preston looked from Denise to Ethan. Executive travel notes? He muttered. Margaret's mouth went dry. The confidence in her eyes began to thin. Denise listened. Her posture straightened. Yes, she said into the headset. I'm standing in first class now. Passenger is still on board. No, security has not been called. Victor's face tightened at that last sentence. Ethan noticed. So did Luke. So did Helen. Denise lowered her voice, but not enough. Yes, I understand. I'll advise the captain. She stepped fully into the cabin now. Captain Mitchell is being notified. Allison's eyes flickered toward Victor, searching for protection. Victor gave her none. He was watching his own career move from solid ground to loose sand. Preston tried to recover the room. For heaven's sake, are we taking off or not? Ethan finally turned toward him. That depends, he said, on whether this airline wants to keep pretending this is about a seat. The words spread through the cabin like pressure before a storm. From row 3 to the galley. From the galley to operations. From operations to offices where executives would soon ask one terrifying question. What did our crew just do? Ethan picked up his phone and tapped a contact named Natalie Brooks. She answered on the first ring. Ethan? Her voice was calm, but he heard the concern underneath. Natalie had worked with him for 12 years. She knew he did not call before takeoff unless something mattered. I need you to notify the board chair, Ethan said. Meridian Air has created an incident on Flight 826. First class. Seat 3A, multiple witnesses recording. Natalie did not waste a breath. What category? Ethan looked at Allison. Then Victor, then the Caldwells. Discriminatory service escalation, he said. Potential contract review. 4 words. Clean. Corporate. Devastating. Allison closed her eyes. Victor looked at the floor, and outside the window, rain kept sliding down the glass, like the morning itself was keeping record. Natalie Brooks went silent for half a second. Not because she was shocked. She had worked beside Ethan long enough to know that humiliation rarely arrived wearing a mask. It showed up in polite voices, in small delays, in people asking for proof they never asked from anyone else. Understood, she said. Board chair first. Legal second. Do you want public relations alerted? Not yet, Ethan said. Facts first. Victor heard that and looked up. Facts first. Not revenge, not rage, not spectacle. That was what scared him. A furious passenger could be dismissed. A calm executive collecting facts could not. Ethan ended the call and placed the phone on the armrest beside his card. The aircraft felt different now. The air seemed thinner. The cabin lights hummed above them. Outside the door, the jet bridge carried the sounds of airport life. Rolling bags. Distant announcements. A child crying somewhere near the gate. Inside first class, no one moved. Denise Carter stood near the forward galley, one hand pressed to her headset. Her face was controlled, but her eyes were wide with the knowledge of what had just left the aircraft through her radio. Operations knew, corporate would know, and soon the people waiting for Ethan in a conference room would know too. Victor tried to lower his voice. Mr. Brooks, let's slow this down. Ethan looked at him. That is what I have been doing from the moment Allison approached me. Allison flinched when he used her name again. It sounded different now. Not personal. Recorded. Preston Caldwell shifted in the aisle. This is insane, he snapped. You people are acting like he owns the airline. Ethan turned slowly. I don't. Preston gave a short laugh, relieved too soon. But I do own the system your airline wants to buy. The cabin went dead quiet. Not quiet like calm, quiet like impact. Margaret's lips parted. Her face lost color in small patches. Allison stared at Ethan as if his body had changed in the seat, but he had not changed at all. He had been the same man from the beginning. Same voice. Same ticket. Same quiet dignity. That was the indictment, not that he had power. That they needed power revealed before they could recognize his humanity. A door at the front opened. Captain Laura Mitchell stepped out of the cockpit. She was 52, with close cropped gray hair, steady eyes, and the calm walks of someone who had made decisions in storms. Her uniform was crisp. Her face was not warm, but it was awake. She took in the scene with one sweep. Victor standing too rigid. Allison pale. Preston in the aisle. Margaret clutching her handbag. Ethan seated in 3A with a business card on the tray table. Phones recording. Captain Mitchell understood immediately that this was no ordinary passenger dispute. "Mr. Hale," she said, "come here." Victor walked toward her like a man approaching a verdict. Allison tried to follow. Captain Mitchell lifted one hand. "Not yet." Allison stopped. The small command landed harder than a reprimand. Victor leaned close to the captain and began speaking in a low voice. He used careful words now, seeding concern. Passenger refusal, premium member preference, possible escalation. Each phrase tried to soften the truth without fully lying. Denise stepped in. "Captain," she said quietly, "operations confirmed executive notes. Mr. Brooks is Ethan Brooks of Meridian Logic Systems." Captain Mitchell's jaw tightened. For 1 second, regret crossed her face. Not panic, not fear. Regret. The kind that comes when a leader sees the system fail in real time. Not through a report, not through a lawsuit, but in front of passengers with phones raised. She walked to row 3. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "I'm Captain Laura Mitchell. I want to personally review what happened here." Ethan looked up. "I have been asking for that since the beginning." The sentence hit where it should. Captain Mitchell observed it. "Yes," she said, "I understand." Preston stepped forward. "Captain, with respect, my wife and I have been loyal to this airline for years. We always sit in this row." Captain Mitchell turned to him. "Mr. Caldwell, what seats are printed on your boarding passes?" Preston's mouth tightened. "That is not the point." "It is the only point right now." Margaret stiffened. "Our seats are 3C and 3D, she said, almost whispering. Captain Mitchell nodded. "Then please sit in 3C and 3D. Preston stared at her, waiting for the world to bend. It did not. "This is unacceptable," he said. "No," Captain Mitchell replied. "What happened here is unacceptable." The words cut cleanly through first class. Allison looked down at the carpet. Victor stopped breathing for a second, and Ethan, still seated by the rain-streaked window, felt something shift. Not victory, not satisfaction. Something quieter. The first small sign that the truth might survive the room that tried to bury it. Preston Caldwell moved into seat 3C like the chair had insulted him. He sat hard, too hard. The seatbelt buckle clicked against the armrest. Margaret lowered herself into 3D with her handbag clutched in both hands, her mouth pressed so tight it almost disappeared. Neither of them looked at Ethan, but Ethan felt their anger across the aisle. It came off them in waves. Not because they had lost a seat, because they had been told no in public. Captain Mitchell turned back to Allison. "Ms. Reed," she said, "step into the forward galley." Allison's head lifted quickly. "Captain, I was only trying to accommodate our loyal customers." "No," Captain Mitchell said. "You tried to displace a confirmed passenger without cause." The words landed flat, firm, final. Allison's face tightened. For the first time, she looked less polished, less certain. Her lipstick was still perfect, her scarf still tied neatly at her throat, but the authority she had worn like armor was beginning to split. "Respectfully," Allison said, "Mr. Brooks was refusing to cooperate." Ethan spoke before the captain could answer. "I refuse to be moved for prejudice wrapped in procedure." The sentence stopped the cabin. Even the rain seemed quieter against the windows. Victor Hale looked down at his tablet. He had used procedure like a shield many times. Most of the time, it was harmless. A late passenger, an oversized bag, a seating confusion. But now he could feel the danger of a policy used without conscience. It could turn a person into a problem, simply because that was easier than seeing them clearly. Captain Mitchell looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Then we are going to document it properly." Ethan leaned back. "Good," he said, "because this was never just about me." Those words reached Helen Whitaker in row 2 like a hand on her shoulder. She had spent her life teaching young people that history was not just wars and laws. It was ordinary people deciding whether to look away. She had looked away at first. Now she would not. Denise Carter stepped closer from the aircraft door. "Captain Operations is requesting written statements from everyone involved." Allison turned toward her. "Everyone?" Denise held her gaze. "Yes, everyone." Luke Bennett kept filming, but his hand had steadied. He was no longer afraid of being noticed. He understood now that recording was not the same as helping, but sometimes it kept truth from being buried. It made denial harder. It gave courage somewhere to stand. Victor rubbed one hand over his mouth. Can we at least continue boarding while we sort this out? Captain Mitchell looked toward the aisle. Several passengers still waited in the jet bridge. A gate delay was building. The departure window was narrowing. Every pilot hated that pressure. Every airline measured it. Every crew felt it like a clock inside the chest. But Captain Mitchell shook her head. No, we are not pushing back until this is documented. Preston cursed under his breath. Margaret whispered, "This is humiliating." Helen turned toward her. "So was what you did to him." Margaret froze. The sentence was not loud. It did not need to be. For the first time, passengers who had been pretending not to watch began to sit differently. Shoulders straightened. Phones stayed up. A man in row 5 leaned into the aisle. "I saw the whole thing," he said. He showed his ticket. A woman near the window added. They still tried to move him. Allison heard every word like glass breaking behind her. Ethan did not turn around to thank them. Not because he was ungrateful. Because he knew witnesses often arrived late. And late truth, while valuable, still carried a cost. He had paid that cost first. Denise lifted her headset again. "Yes," she said quietly. "Mr. Brooks remains in seat 3A. No security was not called. Captain is holding departure for documentation." A pause. Then Denise's eyes sharpened. She looked at Captain Mitchell. "Corporate Customer Operations is asking to speak with Mr. Brooks directly." Allison closed her eyes. Victor's shoulders dropped. Captain Mitchell walked to the cabin phone and picked it up. "Patch it through." A few seconds later, a man's voice filled the forward cabin speaker. Controlled, older, strained beneath the polish. "Mr. Brooks, this is Martin Keller, Senior Vice President of Customer Operations for Meridian Air. On behalf of the company, I want to apologize for what occurred." The whole cabin waited. They expected Ethan to accept it, to make everyone comfortable again. He did not. "Mr. Keller," Ethan said, looking toward the speaker, "what exactly are you apologizing for?" The question froze the room. Allison looked at the floor. Victor stared at the phone. Preston stopped moving, because vague apologies protect systems. Specific apologies expose them. Martin Keller did not answer fast enough. That pause moved through the cabin like a draft under a closed door. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood it. A senior executive could say sorry in a second. But naming the harm took longer, because naming it meant the company could not pretend this was just a rough morning. The speaker crackled. "Mr. Brooks," Martin said, "we apologize for the confusion surrounding your seat assignment." Ethan's face did not move. There was no confusion. Captain Mitchell looked towards the speaker. Denise Carter lowered her eyes for a moment. She had worked enough gates to know the difference between confusion and cover. Confusion was when 2 boarding passes printed the same seat. Cover was when everyone saw the correct one and kept pushing anyway. Martin tried again. "We apologize for the way the situation was handled." Ethan looked at Allison, then Victor, then across the aisle at Preston and Margaret Caldwell. "Handled by whom?" No one breathed. Allison's fingers curled around the edge of her tablet. She wanted the floor to open. She wanted the sentence to become general. General was safer. General had no faces. But Ethan had learned long ago that pain without names became paperwork, and paperwork often disappeared. Martin cleared his throat. "We apologize that Meridian Air personnel attempted to move you from your confirmed first-class seat to accommodate another passenger's preference." A low murmur passed through the cabin. Preston's face burned. Margaret stared at her hands. Ethan waited. Martin continued, slower now. "And we apologize that the attempt continued after your documentation confirmed your right to remain in seat 3A. Helen Whitaker pressed a tissue beneath one eye. She did not know Ethan. She did not know his company. But she knew the sound of a person forcing truth into daylight. At her age, she had seen many apologies shaped like smoke. This one was beginning to take form. Ethan leaned slightly forward. "And why did that happen?" "That was the blade. Not what? Why?" Martin went silent again. Captain Mitchell watched Ethan with a kind of hard respect now. She had flown through crosswinds over Denver, medical emergencies over Kansas, engine warnings above Nevada. But this pressure was different. No alarm bell, no smoke, no mechanical failure. Just a man asking an airline to name the moral failure sitting in its own cabin. Martin spoke carefully. That is what our investigation will determine. No, Ethan said. Your investigation will determine who participated. The why is already visible. Margaret made a small offended sound. Ethan turned toward her. Mrs. Caldwell believed her expectation mattered more than my assignment. Mr. Caldwell acted on that belief. Ms. Reed enforced it. Mr. Hale escalated my refusal into a possible security matter. At each step, my ticket mattered less than their comfort with my presence. The words did not shake, they struck. Preston leaned forward. That is not fair. Ethan's eyes settled on him. Fair would have been sitting in 3C. The cabin held still. Luke Bennett lowered his phone slightly, his mouth open. He had seen anger before. He had recorded outbursts before. This was different. Ethan was not trying to embarrass anyone. He was refusing to let embarrassment replace accountability. Martin's voice came through again, thinner now. Mr. Brooks, Meridian Air will launch an immediate internal review. That is not enough, Ethan said. Allison looked up sharply. Victor's shoulders dropped. Martin did not interrupt. Ethan continued. I want the passenger service logs preserved. I want the crew tablet records preserved. I want communication timestamps from gate, cabin, and operations. I want written statements from every employee who participated. I want confirmation that no passenger will be retaliated against for recording or speaking up. And I want this reviewed by someone outside Meridian Air's customer operations chain. Denise gave the smallest nod. She knew every request was precise. Every one of them closed a door where stories usually vanished. Martin exhaled. We can agree to preserve records immediately. And the independent review? Ethan asked. A pause. We will escalate that request to the executive committee. Ethan's gaze sharpened. That sounds like delay. It is process, Martin said. No, Ethan replied. Process is what institutions call delay when they expect the harmed person to wait quietly. The sentence burned through the cabin. Even Preston stopped moving. Ethan picked up his phone. Mr. Keller, he said, Meridian Logic's board was scheduled to review your final partnership package tomorrow morning. Until an independent review is confirmed in writing, that review is suspended. Allison closed her eyes. Victor stared at the floor. Somewhere behind the speaker, Martin inhaled as if struck. Mr. Brooks, that partnership is strategically important to both companies. Ethan looked out the rain-streaked window. No, he said softly. Integrity is strategically important. The partnership is paperwork. Martin Keller asked for 5 minutes. Ethan did not move. You have 3, he said. The speaker went quiet. No one in first class spoke while they waited. The cabin had become a courtroom without a judge. The overhead lights shone too white. The rain against the windows sounded louder now, thin lines tapping down the glass. Somewhere beyond the open aircraft door, the airport kept moving, but inside the plane, time had narrowed to the small speaker near the galley. Allison Reed stood with her hands clasped in front of her uniform. Her breathing was shallow. She thought of the first complaint ever filed against her, years ago. A young man in business class had said she treated him like he was sneaking into a place he had paid to enter. Management called it a misunderstanding. She called it an overreaction. Nothing changed. That was the mercy of systems that preferred smooth reports to honest mirrors. Now there were mirrors everywhere. Phones, witnesses, a captain, a CEO. Victor Hale stared at the aisle carpet. He replayed his words. Serious matter. Crew instruction. Cooperation. He had used those phrases so many times they had become automatic. But automatic was dangerous. It let a man stop thinking while still sounding official. Preston Caldwell checked his watch, then stopped. Even that small gesture felt foolish now. His status had carried him through lounges, upgrades, priority lines, and polite smiles. For years he had mistaken preference for right. Now the difference sat across the aisle from him, calm and unmoved. Margaret sat frozen with her handbag in her lap. Her eyes did not leave the stitching on the leather. She wanted to believe she had done nothing wrong. She had not touched Ethan. She had not raised her voice. She had only expected the world to work the way it always had. That was the quiet cruelty of it. Expectation could harm without shouting. Helen Whitaker watched her and felt no triumph, only a tired sadness. She had spent too much of life seeing people defend comfort more fiercely than conscience. The speaker crackled. "Mr. Brooks," Martin Keller said. His voice had lost some of its polish. "Meridian Air's executive committee has agreed to an independent review. Written confirmation is being sent to your office and legal counsel now. All passenger service logs, crew tablet records, gate communications, cabin communications, and operations notes related to Flight 826 will be preserved." Ethan picked up his phone. A message from Natalie appeared. "Confirmation received. Board chair notified. Legal standing by." He placed the phone face down. "Thank you," he said. The simple courtesy made Allison lower her eyes. She had expected anger. Anger she could explain. Anger she could label. Anger she could fold into a report and call disruptive. But Ethan's restraint gave her nowhere to hide. His calm had become the mirror she could not turn away from. Captain Mitchell stepped closer to the cabin phone. "Mr. Keller," she said, "I am delaying departure until replacement cabin leadership is assigned." Allison's head lifted sharply. "Captain." Captain Mitchell did not look at her. "Ms. Reed, you are relieved from first-class service pending review." Allison's mouth opened. For a second, all the authority drained from her face and left behind only a woman facing the wreckage of her own certainty. "I've served this airline for 16 years, she whispered. Captain Mitchell finally turned to her. "Then you knew better." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Victor drew a slow breath. "And me?" he asked. Captain Mitchell looked at him. "You will provide a written statement before this aircraft departs. Operations will decide whether you remain on duty." Victor nodded once. He looked smaller now, not ruined, exposed. A replacement flight attendant entered from the jet bridge. She was a black woman in her early 50s with calm eyes and a steady professional grace. Her name tag read Angela Morris. She paused near the door, took in the room without staring, and walked to Ethan first. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "my name is Angela. I'll be taking care of this cabin today. May I get you some water while we reset service?" Ethan looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." No suspicion. No demand for extra proof. No performance of doubt. Just service. The ordinary thing. The thing that should have happened from the beginning. As Angela walked to the galley, Helen reached across the aisle. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly, "I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner." Ethan turned toward her. "You spoke when it mattered." Her eyes filled. "I should have spoken when it started." That truth stayed in the air longer than any apology. Ethan looked out the window, where the runway lights blurred in the rain. He thought of his father's old words, carried across decades. "Walk in knowing your worth." Today he had done more than walk in. He had stayed seated, and because he stayed, the room had to change. The cabin door remained open for another 20 minutes. That was Captain Mitchell's choice. Not for drama, not for punishment, for transparency. Terminal noise drifted inside the aircraft. Radios hissed. Wheels rolled across the jet bridge. A gate announcement echoed in the distance. Ordinary sounds surrounding a moment that had become anything but ordinary. Allison Reed stood near the forward galley with a Meridian Air supervisor. Her scarf was gone now, folded in her hand like something she no longer knew how to wear. She gave her statement in a low voice. Victor Hale gave his next, slower, careful. Each word measured by a man who finally understood that authority without judgment could do real harm. Preston and Margaret Caldwell said very little. Their silence was no longer powerful. It was defensive. Denise Carter collected passenger names from those willing to be contacted. Luke Bennett provided his video to corporate legal through an official link. Helen Whitaker wrote her statement in careful block letters on a form Denise handed her, her hand shaking slightly. When she finished, she looked at Ethan. "I taught history for most of my life," she said. "I told students courage mattered. Today I learned it still has to be practiced." Ethan's face softened. "We all practice it late sometimes," he said. "The point is not to stop practicing." That answer stayed with her. It stayed with Luke, too. Angela Morris returned with water, a clean napkin, and quiet steadiness. She did not over-apologize. She did not perform sympathy. She simply treated Ethan like a passenger, like a person. After everything that had happened, the normal kindness felt almost sacred. Captain Mitchell came back to row 3 before closing the door. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "I can't undo what happened." "No," Ethan said. She held his gaze. "But I can make sure it does not disappear." Ethan nodded once. "That is all I asked for." A message appeared on his phone from Natalie. "Independent review confirmed. Partnership review suspended until findings are delivered. Board supports your decision." Ethan read it twice, then turned the screen face down. There was power in that message. Real power. The kind that could freeze a contract, shake a boardroom, and force a company to look at the culture it had tolerated. But sitting there by the rain-streaked window, Ethan did not feel triumphant. He felt tired and clear. Power had not made him right. The ticket had made him right. His humanity had made him worthy. The power only made the room admit what it should have seen from the start. Captain Mitchell faced the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be departing shortly. I also want to acknowledge that what occurred here did not meet the standard of respect every passenger deserves. We will document it fully." No one clapped. It was better that way. Some moments are too serious for applause. Preston stared out the window. Margaret looked down at her hands. Allison was escorted off the aircraft without spectacle. Victor remained at the front, waiting for operations to decide whether he would continue. The world had not ended. No one had been dragged away. No one had been destroyed in a single dramatic flash, but consequences had begun. That was more real. That was more lasting. The aircraft door closed with a heavy seal. The cabin changed again. The outside noise disappeared. Seatbelts clicked. Engines deepened beneath the floor. Rain blurred the lights along the runway into gold and silver lines. Flight 826 pushed back late. But it pushed back different. Ethan sat in seat 3A, the seat he had paid for, the seat he had been told he did not deserve. He rested his hand over the old silver watch on his wrist, the one his father had given him when Ethan graduated from Howard. "Walk in knowing your worth." For years, those words had helped him enter rooms that questioned him before he spoke. Today, they had helped him stay in one. He thought of every person who had ever been asked to move for someone else's comfort, asked to shrink, smile, explain, prove, forgive too quickly. He thought of younger Ethan, swallowing insults because survival once required silence. This time he had not moved. And because he did not move, the room had to. As the plane lifted through the gray Chicago sky, Helen quietly wiped her eyes. Luke saved the recording. Angela dimmed the cabin lights. Captain Mitchell guided the aircraft west. And Ethan looked out over the clouds, not healed completely, but steadier. Some victories do not feel like celebration. Some feel like breathing again. If this story reminded you that dignity should never depend on appearance, status, or someone else's comfort, stay with stories like this. Share it with someone who needs the reminder. And if you believe respect should be standard, not special treatment, leave a comment saying "Stand for Justice."